My name is Saul Wordsworth, and this is the IVT Podcast. Hello, I'm Saul Wordsworth, Deputy Editor of IVT International, the world's leading publication for industrial and off-road vehicles in construction, agriculture and mining. Welcome to the IVT Podcast. Ha! It's been 2 weeks since our last episode, and the world continues to teeter on its axis. The impact of Covid-19 globally and within our industry is both profound and, in the longer term, unknowable. Thankfully, for the next 30 minutes, you will be in reassuringly expert hands. Our main interview is with Mr. Jérôme Bandry, Secretary-General of CEMA, the European Agricultural Machinery Organisation. Jérôme is a splendid talker and will offer a considerable insight into the state of play for agricultural machines. But first, an IVT Podcast exclusive. This week, I had the pleasure of speaking with Tom Stone, editor of IVT International, from his luxury home on England's south coast. Tom is an expert in the field and a free thinker, and so I hope you enjoy the following discussion as much as I did. The problem is that you need a haircut and a shave.
I was up half the night worrying about Boris.
I know.
Oh.
I know. I'll keep that bit in. By the way, I'll edit it so that I sound more informed than you. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
But it's a pleasure to have you on the IVT Podcast, if I may say, Tom Stone.
Thank you very much, Saul Wordsworth.
Looking at the news in the last week or so, how would we characterise it? I guess there's lots of clouds, but the odd silver lining.
The odd silver lining, exactly.
So, for instance, China have restarted production for industrial vehicles, as far as I can see, and indeed have been producing for about the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yes, there seems to be some sort of cautious restart of their production there. Well, they started cautiously.
Yeah.
And some issues with the supply chain initially. Yeah. And now things are ramping up again.
I guess the issue with production for China and other countries will be, in the longer term, whether whether projects are continued, whether the projects themselves are furloughed or postponed or whatever, because it'll be project dependent.
It will. It's difficult to predict. I'm sort of thinking that OEMs, wherever they are, whether they're in China or Europe or the US, have a sort of opportunity now. Perhaps we've got to see the opportunities in the. That's a good word. In this crisis, yes. Yeah. And what are the opportunities that OEMs might have? It strikes me that they might have a bit more time and resource to devote to research and development. Some of the R&D projects, often they don't have as much funding as certainly as the scientists involved with them or the engineers would like. But now, perhaps, it's a hiatus, perhaps. Yeah. A lot of these OEMs might be ploughing some more money and certainly time into some of this research and development. And I wonder what they might come up with in this time.
Well, Tom, that brings me on to your favourite subject, which is
antimicrobial surfaces. Yeah. I tell you what it is. It's because, within our publishing group, we do have 2 or 3 aviation titles. And I was, looking over one of the other editors' shoulders the other day, and they were metaphorically speaking, because obviously we're not in the office. But
and also they all have quite narrow shoulders, as I recall. But please carry on.
They're all very trim.
Yeah.
But one of the subjects that's come up and is certainly it's been quite big business in aviation, in the design of aircraft for many years, I think, is antimicrobial surfaces. Because, you have all different people in an aircraft. You have galleys that are very, very small, and they need to be kept clean at all times. And of course, they do clean them. They spend a lot of time cleaning them, even more time now cleaning them with special, special wipes. I think there's more than wipes. They have sort of special sprays and robots and UV light and all the rest of it. Or is it ultraviolet? Yeah, it is ultraviolet light, isn't it? That you can kill microbes. But then also these surfaces, and if it's as simple as having a different kind of surface, is this something that maybe if you've got a backhoe loader or a wheel loader or whatever machine you're using might be used by multiple different operators, would it be a selling point that it could have such surfaces in it? It's going forward as we come back to as we come through this crisis, I would imagine there's going to be a lot more focus on hygiene,
and that's just in our office.
Yeah, you're going to have antimicrobial surfaces on your desk, right?
Yeah, about my person.
What did we see coming out of China recently? There was, just this week we've heard about levels of production returning to normal levels. The OEM production of off-highway vehicles. Shi Yang, director of research at Off-Highway Research China, reported that was, they're having a cautious return to normality. They do have social distancing rules in place.
Yeah, and I believe that they're disinfecting workplaces between shifts. So I can't quite believe that it's returned to normal production fully, but I think they're certainly getting there.
Yeah, and the component suppliers, all part of the chain, and they're starting to come back, and that's just as important. But yes, with their disinfecting workstations, perhaps they could have some antimicrobial surfaces.
Yeah, I guess the key for OEMs is to keep monitoring supply chains whilst staying on the lookout for alternatives, because there's bound to be blockages in the coming months. Otherwise, in the news, I think JCB have had quite a lot to say. They've been producing housings for ventilators for the NHS and delivering hospital gloves, even creating food initiatives around their factories in the UK and India.
Absolutely.
They're doing their bit.
They are. This is great, isn't it? I mean, I hopefully we'll see even more of that. I mean, I know I've seen in Italy some manufacturers making sort of surgical masks and things like that. So, and even a story today about Sears Seating producing personal protective equipment for local hospitals. It's great, isn't it? To if these production lines maybe stop for their traditional or their intended uses, but they can be. It's great to hear that they can be, because you and I were slightly sceptical, weren't we, when the call went out from the UK government to help with making ventilators.
We were.
We were wondering whether this would even be possible for production lines to be retooled so quickly, and the likes of JCB have proved our scepticism unfounded.
They have, certainly to a degree, Thomas.
To a degree, they're not making all the parts, of course.
They're
but
not
I think
making all the parts, but it's still a valiant and indeed humanitarian effort at this testing time.
Yeah, we had other suppliers. We were talking about supply chain as well. OneFlu were hoping to maintain their delivery times for all their components, even through the crisis. So that was good to hear, and perhaps that's a a useful thing to bear in mind when we do start getting back to normal. That many suppliers will be standing ready to serve the OEMs.
Can I ask you, is one flu short for one flew over the cuckoo's nest?
I don't think it is, but
I don't think there's a lot else in the news that we can cover necessarily, except maybe the fact that the construction industry had a good year last year, a better year than expected. So that gives them a decent foundation from which to try and weather this current storm. I believe that sales rose or went up by 3.5% compared to 2018.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was a good year, and yeah. So it's a solid place to try to weather the storm. I'm sure we will weather the storm. OEMs and their service departments will obviously need to be there to continue serving the construction industry. And of course, let's not forget that agriculture doesn't get much of a mention at the moment, but we're not going to stop producing food, as far as I know.
Well, funny you should mention agriculture, Thomas Stone, because my feature interview in this podcast covers that very subject. So this half, if you like, can be dedicated to construction, but then we'll go on to agriculture the second half.
Well, I look forward to hearing that interview.
Well, you will. You won't hear it now. You'll hear it later, but
in the magic of the podcast, it will come right after this, yeah?
Right after this, yeah.
In real life, I'll have to wait. Okay.
Tom Stone, editor of IVT International, thank you so much for your time and appearing on the IVT podcast.
Amazing. An absolute pleasure. Thank you, Saul.
Tom Stone there, editor of IVT International, and dare I say it, one of the good guys. Now it's time for the main event. So relax, pour yourself a drink, only a small one, mind, and settle down to my interview with Jérôme Bandry, Secretary General of CEMA, the European Agricultural Machinery Organisation. So I think I'd like to kick things off, Jérôme, by asking you a bit about your industry, the agricultural machine industry. There's been a lot of talk about the construction side, but much less about agriculture. And I wondered how the agricultural machine marketplace has been affected by COVID-19.
Well, thanks first for the opportunity to exchange on this. And indeed, it's an industry where obviously many manufacturers had to either significantly limit or even stop their production because they were missing components simply with the supply chain disruptions that we've been seeing, or also because they just needed time to push the needed measures in place in order to protect the employees. And of course, as manufacturers, you can guess the protection of the health and safety of the employees and the customers is the utmost priority. We had manufacturers that defined and implemented the containment and the mitigation measures with the local authorities. Sometimes it was just suggestions, sometimes it was mandatory. And that's the social distancing. It's teleworking when you can, working schedules that are flexible, physical distancing, those personal protection equipment that everybody's looking for. So all that we've been putting in place, and we also had initiatives and CEMA helped a lot in doing that, share the best practices amongst the manufacturers so that the containment measures that needed to be put in place for the facilities to remain open were put in place. But it also helped understand that the European agricultural machinery industry, compared to other sectors, is a critical pillar of the EU food supply chain.
Yeah.
And it's true that despite the pandemic, citizens across the EU for now have been able to access a somewhat steady and, of course, safe supply of food. And that's, of course, thanks to the hard work of farmers, distributors, and retailers, but it also helped put in light that you got a very complex supply chain behind this that allows the many stakeholders, crop protection, fertilizers, but also machinery to support the farmers and supply them so that they can help guarantee the food security of our fellow citizens.
Yes.
If I put it simply, if farmers don't have access to ordered equipment, services, or maintenance, they just stop working.
Well, quite. And so presumably farmers would be categorized as key workers, certainly in terms of keeping the world fed. So is there going to be a knock-on effect further down the line where there's a spike in demand for agricultural machines, or older machines are running out, but the supply chain has been affected such that they can't get hold of what they need to?
Well, there's many factors that impact. I mean, to start with, if the borders don't remain open for traffic and trade, then you can't deliver your agricultural machinery that's been ordered. You can't deliver the spare parts. You can't do the servicing. So if Europe is putting into place green fast lanes, which is what they are looking into cross border, we need to be eligible for that. We need to have governments that will do the inspection of the machines. Because if those facilities and governments are closed down, then we can't put the machinery into the distribution system. We need the 24/7 servicing and maintenance that is done by the dealerships and the mechanization companies, because you well know that if you stop an ag machinery because it's needing a part and needing something urgent, everything's urgent, right? If it's in the middle of the critical process. But behind that, as producers, we also need to retain this ability to run the facilities for the machinery, but also for their components and for the spare parts. Because if we can't do that, provided of course the employees can operate safely, then you have this domino effect. Then you have the supply chain that dries up with critical components or spare parts. Yeah. And that is why it's not just the farmers that need to be part of this critical sector. It's also the different elements in the supply chain to the farmers, and ag machinery is a key one in there.
Sure.
If I can, so I would like to focus a little bit on Italy, because this is a very significant element of our supply chain for now. And this is one of the countries in Europe, if not the country, that today prevents our facilities to operate by law. And it's very unfortunate, because we have Italy, as you may know, is by far the second largest manufacturing country in Europe when it comes to our industry. So for our industry to be able to support farmers across Europe, Italy needs to stay open for business because of the many farmers that rely on machinery components and replacement parts. Today, that's not possible legally, because our sector is not included in the critical sectors, or has been removed. We want to regain this ability to produce, because if we don't do that, domino effect on the whole supply chain across Europe, because of the many things that come from Italy. And longer term, somewhat of a challenge to the credibility and reliability of what is a very significant chapter of the global agricultural equipment and component manufacturing community. And this is decided right now by the Italian authorities. All production activities stopped in Italy because that was, also the peak and so on. And unfortunately, the machinery sector, ag machinery sector, and especially the component sector, got locked into this, and probably without the visibility of all the actions. Now, keep in mind what I said initially. First thing is the protection of the employees. But once the manufacturers have gone through the effort of putting in place all what needs to be put in place, leveraging the experience we got from China and everything else, they need to retain this ability to produce, even if it's partially, because down the road, you might be stopping a full supply chain later on with machinery all across Europe and the rest of the world.
Well, I'm certainly interested in this, as you talked about the supply chain, the domino effect down the road. The way you see things currently, where will we be down the road in terms of food production in, say, 3 to 6 months, Europe-wide or even worldwide? Can you see a knock-on effect?
Yes, indeed, especially, agriculture is a little bit special, right? It operates on the basis of seasons, and you can't postpone seasons. I mean, if now is the tillage, fertilizing, spraying, seeding, planting period, you can't put things on pause and say, I'll come back to this after the lockdown in 3 months, right? You have to do the work. Livestock needs to be taken care of. It needs to be fed daily. You have all those critical operations you need to do in the org yards, the vineyards. All these things need to happen. So this is why we think our sector must have this ability to do its utmost to safeguard the growth of food products, because it's not only our food supply today, it's what we will have on our shelves 6 months down the road that is at stake. This is why we need to retain this ability.
Yes. So you are potentially flagging up a food production crisis down the road. Would that be fair?
Indeed. And unfortunately, we could also have an industrial crisis, because let's make no mistake, our industry is also severely hit by what's happening out there. You don't shut down facilities, even if it's temporarily, just, because for the fun of it. There's no fun in there. This will have an impact when we have a better understanding of the full pandemic and its overall impact on society and the economy. We will know better. We will know if we can still meet all the regulatory benchmarks we have, or we will unfortunately probably know that some of us could just not survive through the crisis. Nobody could plan for this. It will have solvency issues attached to it, especially for the many SMEs in our areas. People think about the big companies, but there's more than 4,000 SMEs in our areas specialized in very typical machinery, maybe 20, 30 piece of kit every year, but they're out there, and they will be the first ones facing the solvency issues. So it's also a responsibility of the European Union and the member states to be able to relaunch this industry and the economy when time comes. Of course, CEMA will be there to make recommendations on, but the European Union has, through the CAP, through other emergency measures, really an opportunity to support the domestic demand and help our farmers recover from this. There's quite a lot that is being put in place at the national level. If you're an SME, you probably knock on the door next to you, right? So it's the local support you will get from governments. There's a number of funds that have been put together, but there's also a need for coordination at the European level. There are many discussions you can see in the press about bonds, not bonds. I won't get into this because it's too long, but there's a lot that can be done at local level, national level, European level, to make sure that the industry is still there and that it is supported. But there's also flexibility that can put into place when it makes sense. If we have time, I'll just elaborate a little bit on an example we have.
Sure.
We have, as part of stage 5, and I don't want to get too technical here, but as part of moving into the next generation of engines, so stage 5, there is what we call machines with transition engines. And these are machines where you basically had to manufacture an engine in 2019, and you've got a limited time to assemble them, and to put them on the market. And these dates are now 2020 for some of them, mid 2021 for others. All the engines are there, they have been procured, they're owned, right? So it wouldn't have any impact on the environment, whatever, it's transition engines. But the manufacturers may be missing other components like transmissions, cabs, whatever, that are part of this global disruption that the union is seeing right now, that the world is seeing. And manufacturers may not be able to meet the deadline that is in the legislation for those machines with transition engines. This is ridiculous because we have the engines already. We're just going to miss the deadlines because of other components. So we've been asking, together with the other manufacturers of machinery, construction equipment is in there, and others, we've been asking the Commission to put a moratorium on the dates for finishing the completion and putting on the market of those machines, because of the changes in the supply chain that we've been seeing in the major disruptions. And we're working on this right now, but this is something easy that the institutions could do to help the industry now when it's needed, and give a little bit of time for the supply chain to be put back in place.
Where do you see the agri-machine industry in a couple of months, realistically, Jérôme?
That's a very valid question. We do, as you may know, Barometer every month. It's published on the CEMA website. And I just, before I call, had a look again at the one in February and in March. In February, the general climate, business climate index for the machinery, it was still in the negative range, but we could see it was starting to improve back. So when we were discussing about this with the industry leaders again in February, they would say, this is probably going to be just a temporary correction. It's not the current recession we're seeing is going to be shorter compared to the big one that we had in the past. And then, of course, March survey comes in. Beginning of March, this is where we got the questions asked and the answers, and it's 140 business leaders in our sectors filling in this survey. And already there, even if most of the respondents had replied by the beginning of March, already there you could see the curve going back down. So it already had an impact and this was not the peak. This was not the peak of the discussion. Mm-hmm. So we've asked actually our guys to move the survey a little bit faster. We should get the results of this month's survey within the coming days. And this will probably already show the first impact on the current business sentiments and 6 months down the road, future business sentiments. And I'm afraid it will show a lot of impact of COVID-19.
Lastly, Jérôme, do you have a message that you'd like to convey to your colleagues in the industry?
Yes, definitely. As CEMA, we're trying to help. We're trying to coordinate. We're trying to put in place all the exchanges. But I think our industry needs to keep 2 things in mind. The first one is safety first. Mm-hmm. We're going nowhere if we are not putting in place the needed measures for our people to come back to work, stay at work, and produce as much as they can. Mm-hmm. And this is critical because of what we've described before. It is critical because we are such a critical pillar of this food supply chain. We have this critical role to play in supporting farmers all across Europe to keep running, to have their operations producing, and to deliver this high quality food for ETU citizens today, and as we stressed, tomorrow.
Jérôme Bandry, thank you very much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, thank you.
That was Jérôme Bandry, Secretary General of CEMA, with some genuinely fascinating insights into the agri-vehicle market. Join me again soon for another episode of the IVT podcast. In the meantime, stay safe, stay indoors, and stay in touch with us on Twitter at IVT_MAG, online at IVTinternational.com, and of course via this podcast. That's it from me. Until next time. The IVT podcast is a Mark Allen Group production. Please like and subscribe. If you're interested in appearing on the podcast, reach us via our website, IVTinternational.com, or email ivt@markallengroup.com.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boy.